Hello everyone, welcome back to the Alabama Woodworker. My name is Hui. In this video, I construct the solid cherry tabletop for a contemporary style trestle table. I choose the lumber, rough cut the boards, mill the boards, glue up the panels, machine an edge profile, and sand the top. Let's get started. I flatten the faces of the boards on my joiner well enough so that they'll reference on my planer bed. I'm not taking these boards down to final dimension. I'm just simply taking enough off the surface to see what the grain structure is like so that I can appropriately match the boards for a tabletop. When I was choosing lumber for my tabletop from my lumber stack, I chose a lot more boards than I needed, knowing that I would eliminate some of them. I based my initial choice on the structural integrity of the boards. The fact that they were relatively straight, very little twist or cup, the fact that there were little to no defects. After I face jointed and planed the surfaces of the boards, I exposed the grain structure, and there were a couple boards that had a little bit too much going on, a little bit too much patterning, maybe a little bit too much weathering, and it just didn't match the rest of these boards, so I eliminated them. I still have plenty of width to make up my tabletop to maybe even eliminate another board. But what I see so far is really good, and I like it. I am going to let these settle for a couple of days. We just did some major surgery, and these boards have been air drying in my garage for a little over a year. So after the initial milling, these boards are going to flex, twist, maybe even bend a little bit. In a couple of days I'll come back, I'll do a final flattening of the surface and final thicknessing, and then I'll make my selection in terms of orientation and order. I got the boards to a final thickness of 13/16. Now I'm going to edge joint on my jointer and do a rip to width on the table saw. I'm now going to rip the boards down to maximum width to get the most yield out of each board. I changed out my blade to a 24-tooth ripping blade. This is going to give me a much cleaner cut when I'm ripping hardwood. While I'm not going to show you the boring and arduous process of me flipping boards and figuring out the orientation, I will give you the logic as to why I chose the layout that I did. If we look on the edge of the boards here, we'll see the annual rings and the direction that I've outlined with my pencil marks of the annual rings. If you see here, the first board has annual rings that are cupped down. The second board has annual rings that are cupped up. The third board has about half those rings are pointed down, and then the fourth board has here the annual rings pointed up. And the reason why I'm doing this is to create structural balance. I want one board, if it's going to cup, to go one way, and the other board, if it's going to cup, to go the other opposite direction. This again creates structural balance so that overall the panel is going to remain relatively flat throughout seasonal changes. It's really difficult to explain the orientation and order process for panels on a panel glue-up because it's really difficult to show the grain structure on camera. But I'm going to try my best to sort of explain the logic behind why I chose the orientation that I did. These two boards here have a small amount of sapwood that really ties the two boards together. So it made sense for those two boards to be right next to each other. These two boards had a small inkling of a knot between the two, and again, it made sense to tie those two boards together. These two boards were the straightest that I had, and so I tied those two together, and these two boards had a very similar coloring that tied with the other two boards that were next to it. So I put those two boards together. For the most part, this is pretty straight grain. There are some cathedrals and there are some spots with a little bit of wonkiness in terms of the grain. But it was really difficult for me to get boards that looked exactly alike. So this was sort of my best attempt. Again, I'm still learning, and you know, I'm dealing with the stock that I have, and so I thought this was the best orientation configuration for the boards for this tabletop. I've got my tabletop out of the clamps and the seams look really good and tight. I'm now going to square up two edges and then cut the tabletop to final length using my track saw. I'll then go to my table saw and cut the tabletop to final width. I treated the edge of the tabletop with a simple round over bit. I'm now going to sand the tabletop with 120, 180, and 220 grit sandpaper. While I'm really happy with the final shape and structure of the table, I'm not terribly fond of the layout of the panels. Don't get me wrong, I think the table looks great, and I'm positive the couple that will receive the table is really going to enjoy it. I just put most of my attention in making sure the annual rings were properly oriented for stability, but put less emphasis on grain matching the panels. This could have been alleviated by milling up more boards to choose from, or better yet, sequentially stacking boards to dry as they came off of the mill. Now, the latter wasn't possible since I bought the raw sawn cherry boards randomly stacked before I stickered them up at home. I still have to prime and paint the base, apply finish to the tabletop, and attach the tabletop to the base, and I'll cover all that in the last video. So we'll see how it looks once finish is applied. Before I sign off, I want to mention two woodworkers that I highly recommend you subscribe to on YouTube or follow on Instagram. Guy Dunlop from Guy's Woodshop and Philip Morley from Philip Morley Furniture. Guy has been making furniture for over 20 years and his videos are highly educational. Philip is a professionally trained furniture maker in Wimberley, Texas, and he makes some very exquisite pieces. Both of these guys have videos that explain their techniques in a pedagogical manner. If you like my videos, you need to jump over to their channels and check them out. If you have questions or comments, leave them below. If you like what you saw, hit the like button, or hit the subscribe button, or hit both. You can also follow me on Instagram at Alabama Woodworker to get the day-to-day scoop on what I'm doing in the shop. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.